I love that version of the Bible, the Message, by Eugene Peterson. It's I think a little more digestible and palatable than perhaps the New Revised Standard that says essentially, "Blessed are you when men revile you and persecute you for my name's sake, for such were the prophets before you." That seemed always a little bit harder to fathom. You know, this idea of you're going to be blessed. People are going to beat you up. It's going to be good. They might throw some rocks at you. It's a good thing. They killed the prophets before you. You're in good company. And while that may be true, I think it misses the point. And this morning we're finishing up this whole series on the Beatitudes as an art of being, a way of being in the world. And it's been fun for me. It was a last-minute thing with the deaths of my mother and mother-in-law, and within 2 weeks of each other in January. It just sort of changed the direction of where my mind was, and the Beatitudes seemed to speak to that for some reason. And so it's been a great journey for me. And the past couple of weeks, in between, I've actually been getting a few emails here and there from people just having some comments, which has been fun to see the ways in which people are working with some of these ideas. New way of thinking of these Beatitudes is actually something quite accessible, not some sort of perfection in the Netherland and the kingdom to come, but a reality right now and here, a way of being now, here and now. And this past week, I gave you this suggestion of going out and trying some prefigurative intervention, I called it, which was basically doing things as if the kingdom of God were present, as if we were already living in that context of humility and peace and mercy and meekness, to actually sort of just live out of that as opposed to sort of hoping you can make a change, just literally being that change. And some people emailed me back and had done some random acts of kindness kinds of things, which were really interesting, and one of which sparked an idea. Some folks bought some coffee, and someone was in line at a Jack in the Box and paid for the meal behind them. I mean, there were several of those kind of things, which I thought were really wonderful, and just kind of spreading some joy. Somebody suggested they were putting money in meters, and it reminded me of something in parking meters, and it reminded me of something that a group had done last year, and I forget what their name is. They're an improvisational kind of group, but I forget their name. But I read about it in Yes Magazine, which I talked about last week. What they had done was actually gone and just put enough quarters in enough meters blocked together to own that space for a period of time, and then threw a public party just in that space, because that was their space. They paid for all the parking spaces. And that made me think of, what would it be like if we took Post-it notes, and a bunch of us just did this, and say we went over to the prison or to the courthouse area where there's a lot of tension, right? I mean, even if you're just there to pay your title and registration, it's a pain to go there. But if you're dealing with other stuff or legal stuff, I mean, just a very difficult, depressing, stressful environment. What if we just went around with little Post-it notes that said, "Be the change"? Be the change you want to see, and then put that on there, and then put about 2 hours worth in all of those meters, and just put that little Post-it note there. What would that say? What would that do? Yeah, I mean, just taking opportunities to prefiguratively live as if, and start to live as if the change is already happening. I think that's what the Beatitudes are all about, and today I think we have in particular this challenge of being peacemakers, which seems a little bit contrary to where we are in our culture right now. The reality is that peace seems unreachable. And I want to ask you, if you take just a second to think to yourself, what is actually peace? What does peace mean? Because it occurred to me as I'm looking at these Beatitudes, and I'm thinking about mercy, and I'm thinking about humility, and I'm thinking about meekness, and thinking about peace. These are all sorts of words we banter around forever. We've been talking about peace forever. We talk about humility. All these are words we sort of toss around as if, yeah, we know what they mean. But really, what does peace mean? What do you think it means? So it's not rhetorical. Throw out a couple of things. I won't grade you. No more war? Okay. Okay, so there's a difference. Peace is different in different situations. There's world peace, there's personal peace, okay, yeah. So we're going to have to go check that reference out now. We're going to have to go listen to that. Okay, Steve Martin on SNL, World Peace. Okay, we'll check that out. That's a delayed answer, so to speak. Okay, what else? Anything, other things about peace? Mutual understanding, what? Peace of mind. Okay. Let's get what that feels like, maybe a little more about what that feels like. What does peace feel like then? Yeah. Calm, serene. Okay. No conflicts. So that's pretty much generally the way we think about peace. We think about peace as the absence of stuff. We think about peace as the absence of conflict or the absence of war or the absence of stress or struggling, and that results then in what we say would be calm, which I think is common for us, and I think maybe that's our problem, because I think peace is already here. We're not tapping into it. We're not acknowledging it. We're not being a part of it. When Jesus says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall see the kingdom," he said later, don't look for signs of the kingdom. The kingdom is in your midst. There's this difficulty with our way of thinking that always puts things beyond our reach, that always sees things as apart from us, so we have to strive to make things happen. And it's a part of our natural makeup, our biological makeup, to do that. And because fear is also an integral part of who we are, it's a part of our biological makeup, then we oftentimes tend to respond out of that first. As I'm thinking about this, I want to just mention for just a second that there's a lot to be afraid of, right? There's plenty to be afraid of. We've got lots of things to be afraid of. There's lots to be stressed about. Families, suffering, dying, losing loved ones, job security, pain. There's lots to be afraid of, right? But that's not how our brain was designed. Our brain was designed biologically to be afraid of wild animals. Yeah, I was thinking tigers. Saber-toothed tigers. Thank you. Our brain was designed to be afraid of saber-toothed tigers. I mean, that's how our brain was designed. Our brain is literally designed with these specific chemicals to react to specific emergencies, which is why someone can, like Dwayne, can jump out of a plane and parachute without any anxiety. That's not true. You still have some. You'll hang on a kite at several thousand feet up in the air. I know that. So even though there is fear, there's some kind of confidence in response to that. Your adrenaline is going, but your cortisol is not. And that's what's important, because it's the cortisol in our brain that kicks in for specific reactionary kinds of things. The problem is that when we're always stressed, guess what that cortisol is doing? It's always kicking in. So it's literally flooding our brain with the wrong stuff, right? Which is why you hear doctors talking about how stress literally can kill us. I mean, quite literally, the culture we live in, fear is killing us. It's kind of a hard thing to get my brain around sometimes. But the fact that it's doing that, I think, is partly because, once again, we're not seeing what is really there present with us. And this idea that Jesus says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, they shall see the kingdom. Blessed are those who mourn, they shall be comforted." It's not a karmic kind of thing. It's not a cause and effect kind of thing. It's simply a reality that we somehow have difficulty getting in touch with. When I was in college, I went to a dentist. I had to have 5 teeth extracted at the same time. I was 21 years old, and I went to a dentist that wasn't my family dentist. And I went in, and I remember he sat me in the chair when he was a young guy, and he had young assistants there with him and stuff, and they were all college students. And he looked at me, and there was a bright light shining. I'm in this vinyl chair, with all the instruments and tools and stuff. And he said, "So before I begin, I've got to ask you, does having a bright light shining on your face and having the sound of high, shrill drills beside you and people looking around you like they might have to hold you down at some point, and then these instruments of extraction, does that create any anxiety for you?" And I knew what he was getting at, and I said, "I'll take the nitrous oxide." And when he put it to my face, he says, just breathe. I went, and I took in as deep a breath as fast as I could. And within just an instant, I was talking to Buddha and Jesus and Abraham Lincoln. And here's the interesting thing, of course, is as I had no idea what was going on at that point. I clearly did not just relax. I kind of just went overboard with the whole thing. But I had this wonderful experience, right? I had started hearing Abraham Lincoln was telling jokes to Jesus, and they were all laughing, and I started laughing with the laughter, and that just created more laughter. And afterwards, they told me I was the most entertaining patient they have ever had. Because apparently I had my hands flailing, I was laughing and bouncing my belly up and down, and while I would suggest to you that is the wrong thing to do, because addictive personalities, addictive culture is a part of our reality, is a part of our typical way of trying to deal with stress. So I don't want to be suggestive of that in any way, but it was an eye-opener for me. How do we actually get to a place of deep calm? How do we get to a place of comfort? How do we practice that kind of peace with others? And I want to suggest a couple of quick things. The Peace Corps was started on one principle: understanding. It was started in 1961, just some years after World War II. Some years after the Korean War. But it was started with the notion that young adults need to experience understanding with other cultures, and they need to experience understanding with America. And then the context, of course, was to provide learning, to provide training, to empower the communities to deal with their own issues, right, to have the resources. And so they had those three goals: empower the community, and then understand that community, and help them understand us. But the key thing was understanding. Now, if you look up the word peace in the dictionary, the first word you'll see is absence of conflict. And if you keep digging a little bit further, you'll see a few other things like calm, some of the things that we defined in here. If you go to the etymology of the word, which I love doing word studies, you get back to some of its earlier understanding, and you see words like harmony, reconciliation, balance are part of the root words of peace. If you look at the same studies behind the word understanding, it means to bring together. It means to be in the midst of. So you have reconciliation, which is to bring together. You have understanding, which is to stand in the midst of. And what I think we are being invited to do with the Beatitudes is literally to stand in the midst of life as a bridge. And by being open, we begin to understand. We had this wonderful experience in our staff meeting a week ago. We had a staff retreat here with staff and lay people in this room, about 50 of us. And the consultant did this one activity towards the end of our deal called appreciative inquiry. Has anyone ever done appreciative inquiry in your businesses or groups? It's astonishing to me that people don't do this on a regular basis. It's just completely amazing to me. But the basic concept of appreciative inquiry is that you do your planning, you do your strategic work with one another through the process of understanding, through the process of discovering about each other. Not through sort of a hierarchical decision-making process, but through dialogue. So appreciative inquiry begins with stories and sharing stories, but particularly you're paired up with people who might be strangers to you, because that's where we begin to understand our common ground as opposed to our differences, right? We start at our common ground. I had this personal experience years ago in the International Association of Hemophilia Camps, because I used to perform with them for years every summer at these children's hemophilia camps. And so this international group met out in Phoenix, Arizona, and the speaker there had us do the same thing, but he had it much more black and white, much more concrete and intense. We all lined up on the survey. We all would check off where we were along these hot-button issues: abortion, pro-life, capital punishment, gun rights, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, all these different issues that are hot buttons for most people, right? They are divisive from the get-go. And then we went and we checked off where we were. Most of us were sort of to the right and to the left. Some of us were all the way to the right and to the left. Then he had all 200 of us get up and he says, I want you to walk around and find somebody. And he said, but I want you to find somebody who is completely opposite you. So don't line up with somebody who's going to think like you. Line up with somebody who thinks completely opposite you. Boy, was that uncomfortable. And so there was this guy, I clearly remembered him from my days of hunting with my uncle. I mean, he was, if I had labeled and stereotyped anybody, I had labeled and stereotyped him. He was as redneck as they come, and he had the boots, he had the whole get-up. He looked at me, because he'd heard me sing earlier, and he says, oh, well, what the hell? And so he resigned. Literally, he kind of resigned himself to just sit down with me. And then we sat down, and I want to tell you, it was the most transformative experience I have ever had in my life. And I think it was for him too. Yeah, we had to get past the initial stuff. Here's why I think gun control is important. And then he said, here's why I think rights to arms is important. And it was extreme. But we didn't argue. We just said our point. And then we asked questions if we needed clarification. Then we moved from that into where did we first experience this kind of thing? And he was telling stories about hunting. And then I started telling stories about hunting. And then we went a little bit deeper to talk about the characters in our stories. And then he told me stories about an uncle that he had missed that had been very influential in his life. And then I started telling him stories about my uncle. And before we know it, we were almost in tears with each other because we had shared realities. If we could get to that place with everyone that we thought we were enemies with, we would find out we have far more in common. And that's what I think peacemaking is about. I think it's trying to get us to that place where we recognize before we even have the chance to do it that we are already together. I'm going to skip on here to this last point because I brought this along and I wanted to use it. And then I'm going to invite the band to come on up because I know that we're going to be doing a song in just a minute. Well, actually, what we can do is we'll do... Yeah, you have to get. So do you have time to play it now, or do you need to get? Okay, we can do it now. All right, so we're going to interrupt my sermon for just a moment so they can do the sermon, and then we'll end. Because Doxie has to leave quick. And I think she has a cello solo in the middle of it. No, okay. Thank you. That was beautiful. Thank you. So we'll close with this thought here. Next week we'll do the ukulele. We'll bring out the ukulele next week. But I'll give you a little bit of a foreshadowing to that. One of the things that struck me, I fell in love with Israel Kamaka Wiwole, who, and most of you all know, is the composer of the medley, Somewhere Over the Rainbow with What a Wonderful World. But the story behind why he did that is pretty fascinating. It's if you know Iz, or he died 7 years ago thereabouts. He was morbidly obese. He had obese issues and health issues from childhood. He had so many what you would consider really painful, difficult health issues, and yet the man somehow found brilliance in life, found joy in life, lived for his connection to his community and to Hawaii, to the environment. When he put this song together, the reason why he did it, he said, was because it represents life as it is and life as we think it should be. It represents fear, and it represents living as if. When you really think about the lyrics, Judy Garland singing that song and Wizard of Oz, it's such an angst-filled song, right? I mean, we love it, and yet it represents some of our deepest sadnesses, our deepest longings, our deepest hopeful remedies to all the pain and suffering. And yet, the answer seems to be, if we can just get away from it, then it'll be okay. If I could just get over the rainbow, if I could just get to that place where troubles melt like lemon drops, it would all be just fine. You know, I've heard about it in lullabies. I've read about it in the Bible. You know, we understand that pain. And yet Iz then matches that right with this beautiful song about what a wonderful world we live in. And you want to go, what world do you live in? Really? And he says, yeah, look at the trees. Look at the sky. Look at the people and all the colors in their faces as they're passing by. Colors of the rainbow. He says when people greet one another, they're not just saying hi. We've talked about in here, they're wearing the sign that says love me. They're shaking hands that say I love you. They're living as if. And then, of course, it ends with the recognition that we have no idea the brilliance, the change, the hope that the children will bring. But we live as if. It's such a profound statement of faith that I had not seen it until this last week as I was thinking through this. How do we live in the presence of divisiveness? Well, you can't resist it because, as the old saying goes, what you resist will still persist. What we do is we make friends with it. We have to sit with the things that are uncomfortable. We have to be willing to recognize that in the midst of that pain, we are never alone. We are always in the presence of the holy. We are always in the presence of God. We are always in the presence of the ground of being, which is why once we begin to see that in one another's faces, we begin to break down the very fears that are driving all of us. But we have to be willing to sit with it for a while and to be friends with it. You never run from fear. You just make friends with it and find at the heart of all of that is this love of God. Let's all stand for a blessing.